Colonel Clark, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Distinguished General Officers, Generals Rosas, General Jobim, General Montañez, and General Arias, and officers from the armies of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, it is a great honor for me to participate in the Conference of American Armies. As a public affairs officer of the United States Army South, I will speak with you today about the importance of regional peacekeeping operations, especially because of the strong leadership roles your armies play in the field of peacekeeping training. Flying into northern Chile in 1975 and seeing tanks along the northern border with Peru, it served to remind me of border hostilities in Latin America. Growing up in Panama, a country with a 21-year history of dictators who occasionally became involved in border disputes, it seemed normal for me to see military deployment along border areas, although the possibility of conflict also struck fear in me. While border intrusions often lead to strife, peacekeeping activities usually lead to dialogue and partnership through the deployment of military and civilian personnel to implement or monitor ceasefires and to separate forces. The topic of my speech should be important to each of you because we share common bonds that are based on common values and common objectives. The reason that our armies exist is to protect our families. The slogan of U.S. Army South, Defense and Fraternity, highlights not only the element of defense, but it also places equal importance on brotherhood. In a similar way, the Brazilian Army slogan of Strong Arm, Friendly Hand serves to reaffirm the commitment to provide force as well as assistance. Today, I'm going to talk about the positive impact that peacekeeping has on the region. Peacekeeping, as defined by the United States Army, is the action of a third party between warring forces, enforcing a ceasefire or other truce, usually in support of political moves towards a lasting settlement. Now I'm going to share a few details about the three main points that I will cover in my speech. First, I will tell you how peacekeeping training impacts people who live in the local disputed areas. Then I will tell you how peacekeeping training benefits the armies who participate in peacekeeping activities. And last of all, I will tell you how peacekeeping training benefits the region. Now that I've explained a little background about the importance of peacekeeping, let me tell you how it impacts people who live in the disputed areas. Just as I felt fear when I looked out of the airplane window and saw the buildup of tanks along the border between Peru and Chile, imagine the terror that residents of the upper Cenepa Valley felt when fighting broke out in January 1995 on the Ecuador-Peru border. During a 6-week period, there was a rapid buildup of troops along the border as more than 100,000 people were mobilized. Fleets were deployed, air assets were repositioned with strike capabilities on each other's capitals, and approximately 300 casualties were reported as heavy fighting erupted. I have just described the human toll that bears the brunt of border wars. Unfortunately, until agreements are reached and accords are signed, residents of the disputed areas suffer. In addition to loss of life, they often lose property and their livelihood. In this scenario of complete chaos, a small group of only 100 peacekeepers from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and the United States prevented the escalation of violence as they separated the belligerents, supervised demobilization, created a demilitarized zone, integrated former belligerents into a peacekeeping force, and maintained a secure environment so diplomats could discuss the long-term resolution of the problem. Once peace was brokered, suffering to the local people stopped and all parties benefited because the peacekeeping process facilitated dialogue and understanding between neighbors. Now that I have discussed the impact that peacekeeping has on individuals who live in areas of conflict, I will address the benefit that peacekeeping training provides to soldiers as they standardize their training with troops from other armies. The purpose of peacekeeping training is to increase interoperability and peacekeeping capacities among partner nation peacekeeping leaders and trainers to improve peacekeeping procedures and training methodologies. by providing opportunities for armies to work with partner nation militaries at the joint and combined levels with civilians, police, the United Nations, and non-governmental organizations in scenarios that approximate real-life United Nations peacekeeping missions, soldiers are prepared for possible United Nations deployments in the region or elsewhere. During the May 4, 2009 opening session of the Hemispheric Peacekeeping Conference in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Luciana Micha, Director of Peacekeeping from the Argentine Ministry of Defense, described the goal of peacekeeping training by saying, "It is to provide realistic training that is multidimensional, complex, and integrated, so that leaders and their staffs are better prepared to function when faced with actual peacekeeping missions." Now that I've explained the benefit to the people who lived in the impacted areas and the benefit to soldiers who train with neighboring armies, let me talk about the way peacekeeping operations can benefit the region. Peacekeeping training is beneficial to all parties because dialogue can create understanding which can prevent disputes from escalating into conflict between neighbors. The outcome of successful peacekeeping training is that it can lead to partnership and increased regional prosperity. Secretary of Defense William S. Cohen supported this idea when he spoke about the way that peacekeeping turns neighbors into partners during a hemispheric conference April 15, 1997 in Miami. He said that through peacekeeping, distrust and discord can give way to prosperity. In summary, I've talked about how peacekeeping operations benefit the individuals in areas of conflict, how armies can learn from each other when training together, and how peacekeeping operations can play a role in changing the dynamic of a region from one of confrontation and skepticism to one that will support peace by building trust and interacting with former enemies in order to build security, a key ingredient of prosperity. It takes very little to trigger an international incident. The famous soccer war of Central America is an example of how easily tensions can ignite that lead to violence. In this case, underlying political tensions had been building up for years. When the Honduran government expelled an estimated of 60,000 Salvadorian peasants who had illegally immigrated to Honduras, this led to tension along the border. The straw that broke the camel's back was the soccer game tournament for the 1970 World Cup between the two national teams, which ended in street brawls and riots resulting from protests from the Salvadorian government. Hostilities quickly escalated as the Salvadorian military launched air attacks on towns in Honduras. The day after fighting began, the Organization of American States met and called for an immediate ceasefire. Although the shooting only lasted 100 hours, a state of war existed between the two countries for 10 years until a peace settlement was finally reached. If the soldiers of the armies of these two countries had been trained in peacekeeping, it is entirely possible that peace would have been brokered much more quickly. And preventive diplomacy may have helped to prevent the dispute from developing into conflict. As members of the armies of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, you stand out in your capacity to teach peacekeeping training. As a collective, members of your armies have participated in hundreds of peacekeeping deployments. You are trailblazers, and you understand the nuances of working in accordance with United Nations and Conference of American Armies standards. Your achievements in the field of peacekeeping operations have positively impacted the region, for which you are to be congratulated. You are nations who believe in peacekeeping principles. You are nations who lead the way in the teaching of peacekeeping operations. You are nations who will continue to make a difference in the world by using peacekeeping operations to separate warring factions. Your legacy in peacekeeping is well known, and I am proud to highlight your achievements. With great expertise comes great responsibility. Now that you have developed this impressive resource, I encourage you to enlist others to enroll in your schools so that they can make a positive difference in the region and around the world. As you build trust and interact with former enemies, your work will build regional security, a key ingredient of prosperity. It has been a pleasure for me to address you today, and I thank you for your time and attention.